Welcome coders to Introduction to ICD-10-CM. This is part 1. I'm Mrs. J and I'm so excited to begin this journey with you. Now, this may be your very first experience with medical coding, and that's a big deal. So we're going to start with ICD-10-CM. This is the foundation of all coding systems. ICD-10-CM, if you didn't know, are diagnosis codes. Yes, this is what the doctor says is wrong. This is what the doctor this is what justifies the doctor doing anything. All right, so that is going to make sense in a little bit, but let me tell you what's going to happen. In this session, we're going to learn how to look up codes. We're going to understand code structure. We're going to learn how to apply codes. And over the 4-part series, it's going to make sense. We're going to study intense. We're going to have an intense but basic introduction to ICD-10-CM. All right, coders. So grab your coding manual and let's get started. Goals of the presentation. Number 1, we're going to discuss the history of ICD-10-CM, the structure of an ICD-10-CM code. We're going to demonstrate how to look up an ICD-10-CM code. We're going to provide you with scenarios and quizzes to test your knowledge. And we're going to demonstrate some of AMCI ICD-10-CM techniques. But first, CPT is copyright of the American Medical Association. Keyword concept FTR Chun, AMCI Fab 7, AMCI ICD-10-CM Flip Tap, and MCG are registered trademarks of AMCI. The credentials CPC, CRC, COC, CPMA, CPB, CPPM, CPCO are owned by AAPC. The credentials CCA, CCS, CCS-P, RHIA, and RHIT are owned by AHIMA, and AMCI does not own the rights to these credentials. All right, we're going to begin with how to look up a code in ICD-10-CM in the manual. And at AMCI, we say there are 3 basic steps. Step number 1, look up the main term in the alphabetic index. Number 2, you'll need to verify the code in the tabular list. And 3, review all guidelines. That's it. 1, 2, 3. And after you look up that code, it can be up to 7 characters long. Now, enough about the code right now. We're going to talk about the code structure a little later, but I want to have a discussion about the history of ICD-10. All right. So before we talk about the history of ICD-10, let's talk about the history. ICD is the acronym for International Classification of Diseases, and it was first developed by the World Health Organization, or WHO. Now, this happened in 1948 when it took over the responsibility of the International Classification of Diseases. So let me just give you a little backstory. In 1893, the original system was called the International List of Causes of Death, and it was developed by a French gentleman named Bertillon. He did this, he compiled this list from about the 1900s until 1945. And it went through many revisions, And then in 1948, the WHO adopted that list and they published ICD 6. And this was the first version of ICD. And they, I don't want to say modified it, but they augmented it and they included both morbidity and mortality data. So it just wasn't a list of causes of deaths. So it started developing this list of diseases. Now, since then, WHO has managed the updates. They had an ICD 9, and that was released in 1979. They had, and they also developed ICD 10, which was endorsed in 1990, and ICD 11 was officially adopted by the World Health Assembly in 2019 and it became effective in 2022. Now, you might say, well, why aren't we talking about ICD 11? Well, that is the international classification. ICD 10 or any ICD in the United States has a CM at the end. It is clinically modified for the United States. All right, so let's talk about the history of ICD 10 CM. This is what we use in the US. All right, so the World Health Organization, or WHO, and they're headquartered in Switzerland. They developed ICD 10 in the 1990s, right? And ICD 10 are used by countries throughout the world. Then in 1994, the United States Department, well, CDC, Center for Disease Control, they have a sub entity called the National Center of Health Statistics, and this is the part of the government that manages all births and deaths. Well, they adopted ICD 10 and they felt it needed to be clinically modified for the United States, right? So in 1999, the WHO approved the US's clinical modification, and ICD-10-CM was born. But it wasn't implemented until 2015 when the NCHS officially released ICD-10-CM. Oh, and by the way, there are some other key players in the clinical modification of ICD 10. Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, American Hospital Association, and AHIMA. Yes, AHIMA. All four of these entities are called the four cooperating parties, and they help maintain and manage ICD 10 CM. And finally, Health and Human Services mandates that all covered entities under HIPAA use ICD-10-CM code set. So, in a nutshell, all providers who under HIPAA, who follow HIPAA, have to use ICD-10-CM. And no, ICD-10-11 has not yet been implemented in the United States. All right, so as you can see, I love history. I am a history buff. I love it. But I also like facts as well. And I like fun facts too. So let's talk about some facts, some basic facts about ICD-10-CM. Fact number one, ICD-10-CM is estimated to have 70,000 codes. Number two, there are guidelines and they are divided into 4 sections and appendix. So there are guidelines throughout this manual. And these are the type of guidelines that they have. They have Section 1 guidelines. These are your primary sets of guidelines. This is where you can find your conventions, general and specific coding guidelines. Then you've got Section 2 guidelines. This is your principal diagnosis selection. If you are interested in facility coding, this is where you get your guidance. Also, Section 3, you get guidance for reporting additional diagnoses. And again, these two are for facility coding primarily. Section 4, this is the outpatient guidelines. This is where professional coders and outpatient facilities find their guidance. Also, you've got appendices. There are 8 of them. There are guidelines in there as well. And there are 22 chapters of specific coding guidelines. And just so you know, there is a code for almost any diagnosis. I mean, any. There's a code for assault by a wet willy. Indeed, it is. And that code looks like this. Now, coders, as new coders, you probably say, hey, that's a lot of codes, a lot of guidelines. It is indeed. However, as someone just starting out, we recommend that you begin with professional coding. And that would mean that Section 1 and Section 4 is where you will primarily focus. And we will do that in this session. Now it's time to learn how ICD-10-CM is laid out, how the manual's laid out. And if you didn't realize, we are using ICD-10-CM Expert for hospitals. And the reason we use this manual is because we recommend it if you are taking the AHIMA exams. So it's just easier to use it for all exams. And why we recommend it for AHIMA exams? Because the indicators at the bottom of the page, and I'll show you later, really resonate with those AHIMA exams. They resonate best. And until I can find something else, this is what we recommend. We'll begin with the table of contents. And it starts with how to use ICD-10-CM Expert for hospitals. Then you'll go down what's new for the current year. Then you've got your conversion table of ICD-10-CM codes. So this conversion table shows previous codes that are no longer, and it points to the new codes that are applicable. So this is very good, especially if you've been coding for a while and you're used to or accustomed to having a specific code and it's no longer. This conversion table it's gold. Now, next, there are 10 steps to correct coding. So you might say, well, Mrs. J said there are only 3. No, that's AMCI's way. But ICD-10-CM does things the right way. There are 10 steps to correct coding. However, we simplified it. And our simplification, it's pretty much spot on. But if you want to see the 10 steps, I encourage you to turn to 25, page 25. All right, Roman numeral 25. All right, next, ICD-10-CM official guidelines for coding and reporting. Then you have the ICD-10-CM index to diseases and injuries, Coders, this is your alphabetic index. Next, you have your, and then the index is kind of laid out like this. You've got your index of all diseases and injuries. Within that index, you've got your neoplasms table. This is your cancer table, and we'll show you how to use that a little later. Then you've got your table of drugs and chemicals, and these are used with conditions like poisonings or adverse effects. Yeah, so you're going to have to list the drug and chemical that is involved. You would get it from this table. Then you have an index to external causes. This index is not does not house diagnoses. No, it answers the question of what, where, when, and how. Then, after you leave the index, you're now in the tabular list. And this is step 2 to looking up a code, right? So the tabular list is laid out chapter by chapter from chapter 1 through chapter 22. Then you have your appendices. A, which is a valid 3-character ICD-10-CM code. So yeah, those 3-character codes, we call them the boss. You're going to learn that. Some of them are valid. You can just code a three-character code flat out, and it's not wrong. Then you have your Appendix B. This is your pharmacology list. You're going to learn that. You're going to find this very, very valuable later in your coding journey. Appendix C. This is for Z codes for long-term drug use with associated drugs. Appendix D, E, F, and G, these are all used for facility coding. Appendix H is used for coders who are coding a specific coding set called HCC. And then after that, you've got your illustration. These are the drawings, and these are gold. So they are outlined chapter by chapter, chapters 3, 4. Let's turn the page. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let me get my pointer. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So definitely make these images your friend while you're learning anatomy. This is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal tool. And you know what? You can write on these images. And best of all, you can take these images in your book with you when you take your medical coding exam. Now, as we finish up the layout of ICD-10-CM, there are some things that I want to drive home. I want to talk about the alphabetic index. Alphabetic index, that is step 1 of the code lookup process, right? So you look up that main code, that main term, or your diagnosis in the alphabetic index. That is step 1. And just know the alphabetic index has 2 parts. It's the index to diseases and injuries, where you look up the code, and it also is the index to external causes of injury. Yes. And within the index to diseases and injuries, you have your neoplasm table. This is where you find your cancers and how to code them. You also have your table of drugs. This is where you find your drugs and chemicals that are related to illness and injuries, specifically poisonings and adverse effects. That's where you'll find them. And don't forget, in your index to external causes of injuries, this these are not diseases or illness or injuries here. These are the how, where, and what of that, let's say, injury. Let's say someone burns their hand. What caused the burn? Maybe they were cooking, cooking with an oil. Hot oil caused the burn. That's the what. How did it happen? How did it happen? That's cooking. Where did it happen? In the kitchen. Yes. So, yeah, there are codes for it. So, this is how the alphabetic index is laid out, and it is step one. Now, let's look at step two. And step two is the tabular list. This is where you verify those codes. And you know what, coders? You'll hear me say, these are the colored pages. Look, the colors. So the black and white is your index, and the color pages, that is your tabular list. So the black and white go first, then the colored pages go next. All right, so now that we know the mechanics of the book, let's turn our attention to ICD-10-CM code structure. Facts about ICD-10-CM code structure. As you can see, your diagnosis codes are between 3 and 7 characters in length. Codes can be very specific, and we call that specificity. Now, specificity describes or can describe the severity of the illness or even the body part, etc. Codes have laterality, meaning that they can describe the side of the body that the illness is. And finally, the more characters a code has, often denotes how specific the diagnosis is. I don't think I need to go into that. I think later in this discussion, you're going to see exactly what I mean very soon, not that far off. Now, if you look below, you see the code structure. The first 3 character spaces, this is called a category code. In fact, every single code must have a minimum of 3 characters. And the first 3 characters of a code is called a category code. And if a code only has 3 characters, it's a category code. Next, the 4th and 5th character space. This is called a subcategory code. And the 6th to 7th character space, it's called a code. I know it's confusion because we don't call it. We don't call ICD-10-CM categories, ICD-10-CM subcategories. We call them codes. Yes, they are codes. But these are the formal terms of the code, and it's important that you know what they are. Now, let's take a closer look at the code structure. As I've said before, the first 3 characters, this is your category code. This is the most important part of the code. We like to call it the boss because this is where you'll find key guidelines. Yes, you'll find instructional notes. You'll find includes notes, excludes notes. You'll see all kinds of guidelines right at the boss. And we call it the boss because just like a boss anywhere, you have to check with the boss before proceeding. Now, one thing that's important to note, every single code has a category in it. All right, so every single code has a boss. That means if there's a guideline, a pertinent guideline, you're going to find it at the boss level. Next, your 4th and 5th character spaces. These are key. They're key. This is when you start becoming more specific. This is when the code becomes more specific. This is your subcategory code, and the subcategory section describes or can describe the etiology of a disease, what caused it. It can describe the anatomical site the body part. It can describe the severity of the illness or disease, and it also can tell you laterality and other types of specificity. So our subcategory code is important. Now next, your sixth character space and seventh character space, we call it the code, but the sixth character space often acts like the fourth or fifth characters. The sixth character space describes the etiology, the anatomical site, the severity of illness, the laterality, specificity. However, that seventh character space describes the extension, the extender. It is even a more specific, how can I say it? Well, it gives you much more information about that disease. I can show you better than I can explain it, but you can find your extension often in the seventh character extender box. We're going to take a look at it shortly. But I want to tell you something else about the codes. We know the first three are your character, your category. We know the fourth to fifth characters are your subcategory codes, and we know your sixth to seventh characters. These are your codes. We know that. Here's something else about the code. Outside of the code, you'll see either a red box with a number and a check in it, or a red dot. It depends on your publication. It is very, very important that you know you may not code anything that has a red box or red dot. Think of a stop sign. Stop. Don't code it. Stop. Don't code it. In fact, never code it. Go down one more. That's what that box means. It means don't code it. Go down one more. However, if it has a number in it, it'll tell you, hey, this needs 6 characters. When you get to the 6th character code, if it says this needs 7 characters, you get to the 7th character, and that is what you code. Now, let's take a look at a code. All right, very quickly, we want to take a look at our category, subcategory, and our codes from the perspective of the tabular list. Let's look first at the category code, aka the boss. It's 3 characters long, and if you read to the right, it says injury of urinary and pelvic organs. This is a very general term. It's a very general code. Another thing that's significant about this boss or this category code, look below. You'll see red notations. These are instructional notes, aka guidelines. Look at your excludes 1, excludes 2 notes. These 2 are guidelines, and we'll talk about them in our next presentation. And very briefly, this pink orangey looking color box, this is where you get your 7th character extenders. All right, we'll talk about that later in this presentation. So we know the category codes are 3 characters long. Every single code has a category in it. It does. You have to at least have 3 characters. And we call the category the boss because you have to, or you should stop at the boss to find out if there are any guidelines or instructional notes. After the category, you'll come down to the 4th and 5th character spaces. This is your subcategory, and your subcategories are more specific than your categories. Look, S3 7.0, underneath the category of injury of urinary and pelvic organs, we get more specific. We're naming that urinary organ. Injury of kidney, indeed, is more specific than the category code. And After this 4-character code is your 5th character code. It too is your subcategory, and it's even more specific than the 4 characters. Look, right next to S37.00, unspecified injury of the kidney. This is more specific, and you might say, hey, I don't think so. When you learn guidelines, you'll understand that it is more. So just take my word for it for now. And then after the 5th character space, okay, I'm going to get rid of this pointer. After the 5th character, you go down to the 6th character space, and 6 characters and 7 characters are called codes. And right underneath, let's take a look. We see S37.001, 2, and 9. The difference between the 3 are laterality. Laterality means the side of the body where the injury is. So 001 deals with the right kidney, 002 left kidney, and 009, it means that the kidney was, the side of the body was not specified. All right, so don't forget codes are 6 to 7 characters. Now, I gave you a brief discussion. Now it's time for you to do your thing. I have a quick quiz. Are you ready, coders? I know you are. All right, coders, are you ready for your quiz? Here's your first question. Number 1, when a code has 3 characters, it is called, if you said, a category or boss code outstanding. Next, when a code has 4 to 5 characters, it is called, if you said, subcategory code outstanding. Third question. When a code has 6 or 7 characters, it is called, if you said, it's called a code outstanding. Now we have one more question. I didn't review it on the previous slide. Let's see if you know. When a code has a red box to the left of it, what does it mean? All right. Da, 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 da. Okay, if you said, do not code it, code the next one. All right, so you cannot code any code. You cannot assign any code that has a red box to the left of it ever. Okay? All right. So if you remember that, you're going to be just fine. Now, early on, I told you the basic steps to looking up a code. You look up the main term in the alphabetic index. You verify the code that you get from the alphabetic index in the tabular list. And finally, you review the guidelines. All right, coders, I think we're ready to look up our first diagnosis. And if you feel you want to move ahead faster, go right ahead. All right, I think what I'm going to do, we're just going to follow the steps throughout. I hope that's okay with everyone. And we'll pick up the pace a little later. Now, my question, what is the ICD-10-CM code for hyperlipidemia? Hyperlipidemia. All right, coders, what is the first step? If you said step 1, look up the main term in the alphabetic index, then you are correct. So what is the main term? If you said hyperlipidemia, outstanding. Hey, we only have one code, so that was easy. Now let's go and look up hyperlipidemia in the index. Your index is in the front of your ICD-10-CM manual, and Typically, they're blue or black pages, and you'll see the word index. All right, so alphabetic index and index are used interchangeably. Your terms are in alphabetical order, so let's get started. We're turning the page to the H section, and we're going to search for our term. It's in alphabetic order, and we found hyperlipid, hyperlipemia and hyperlipidemia. You know what, coders? They both mean the same thing. All right, so this is our code, CE78.5. That is our default code. Yes, a default code is a code that's listed next to your main term. That's your default code. So now we need to move on to step 2. Step 2 is verify your code in the tabular list. We're going to verify E78.5 in the tabular list. Where is the tabular list? Well, the tabular list is in the middle of your manual. They have the color pages. The color pages in the middle of your manual, and they are in alphanumeric order. So what you'll have to do is find the alphabet first. You'll find your E. Find your E first, and you can just, if you just flip the book open, you'll see A, B, C, D. Find your E until you get comfortable and you start understanding how the book is set up. That's what I recommend that you do. E, then you look in numeric order. After you find your letter, look for the numbers. It's in that order. So E all the way down to 78.5, hyperlipidemia, unspecified. That looks to be correct, but we have a third step. That third step tells us that we have to review all guidelines. Well, we haven't learned any guidelines. We'll learn them during our next presentation, but for now, if you see any guidelines at the top of the code or the bottom of the code, then if it applies, then you assign the guideline. But for now, we don't have any guidelines, so that means that E78.5 is our code. All right, coders, if you got that correct, outstanding. But if you learned something, that's priceless, and that is what we're striving for today. We're striving towards learning. All right, I have another diagnosis. Are you ready? Our next diagnosis. What is the ICD-10-CM code for Rhinitis? Step 1. Look up the main term in the alphabetic index. All right, we're going to do that. Our main term is rhinitis. That's the only term. So let's go to the index and look in alphabetical order. We see rhinitis, and we also see our default code, J31.0. Again, this is our default code because it is the code that's next to the main term. Step 2. Step 2, we have to verify our code in the tabular list. Our code is J31.0. We're going to go to the tabular list. It's in the middle of the book, and we're going to look for the J's. It is in alphabet numerical order, and we'll start with the alpha J. All right, so what I'd like to do is do what we should always do. We always stop at the category, our category code J31. This is our boss, and if you look to the left of the code, you see a red box. So that means we're not going to code it. But if you look underneath the category, you see a lot of instructional notes. These red notes are guidelines. Read them, and if they apply, then you follow. the guideline. So in this case, we have some notes that tell us to code additionally for tobacco use, if a person was exposed to tobacco, etc. Well, we know that none of this is applicable because we're only coding for rhinitis. We know nothing else. And coders, if you haven't been told before, I'm going to tell you now. You only code what's in the documentation. So you code what you see, not what you think. If you think that person has rhinitis due to environmental tobacco smoke, that's okay, but do not code it. If the doctor didn't say it, then it didn't happen. All right, so now let's get back. We stopped at our boss, but definitely not going to code it because the red box is here and we need to keep going. So let's go down to the next code. Our subcategory code is J31.0. This is the code for chronic rhinitis. And, coders, can we assign J31.0? This is for chronic rhinitis. We are coding for rhinitis. And you know what? The only way that we know if we can use this code is to read the notations below. You'll see these supplementary terms. This means these have the same meaning as these codes can be used for or with J31.0. I apologize. I'm having some technical stuff going on. All right, so if we look below this code, we can code atrophic rhinitis. We can code that, and we can code chronic as well. We can also code granulomatous rhinitis. We can code hypertrophic rhinitis. We can code obstructive rhinitis, ozena. We can code purulent rhinitis, chronic or chronic, not otherwise specified. All right, coders, I'm not going to get into this discussion now, but this NOS is a non-specific term for rhinitis. And you know what? In other words, it means that this is just plain old rhinitis, and that's exactly what this is, plain rhinitis. It is not a specified version of rhinitis, so they have the same meaning. So therefore, it means that we can use this code J31.0. Thank goodness. All right, now that we've identified the code, we verified it, the last thing that we need to do is review all guidelines. Well, we've already reviewed the guidelines at the boss. There are no other guidelines that we know of. So you know what, coders? J31.0 is our code. And if you got that correct, outstanding. But again, if you learned something, coders, pat yourselves on the back because that is priceless. All right, I think I have one more for you. Are you ready for the next code or next diagnosis? All right. What is the ICD-10-CM code for psoriasis? All right, so we have to look up the main term in the alphabetic index. What is our main term? Our main term is psoriasis. So we're going to go to the index, look under the P's, we're going to scroll down and find psoriasis. It's giving us default code L40.9. Next, we're going to verify our default code in the tabular list. Go to the tabular list. Oh, let's stop at the boss. What do we see here? Well, we know to the left of the code is a red box. We cannot code L40. However, it's the boss. Maybe there's some guidelines. There are no guidelines, but coders, here's a phenomenal resource. In my manual, and possibly yours too, you have these definitions. These definitions actually describe what that condition is. So it's a good idea to, because if you, especially if you're learning coding, it's a good idea to read some of these definitions of those diseases and illnesses that you're not familiar. All right, let's go down. We're going to stay on our path. Our path is L40.9. L40, we're going to bypass O, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're going to go all the way down until we hit 9. And this is psoriasis, unspecified. All right, coders, the doctor didn't specify the type of psoriasis, so this is indeed our code, L40.9. There are no guidelines that we can see, so therefore, our third step has been met, and we're going to finalize things with assigning L40.9 as our code. All right, coders, I know you're getting the hang of it. I can feel it. All right, so I told you this was the last one. I have one more. You ready? All right. What is the ICD-10-CM code for hypertension? All right. Well, our main term is hypertension. That's our first step. We're going to look it up in the alphabetic index. We're going to look up the H's, H all the way down to hypertension. And we see I-10. Yes, I-10 is our default. Let's go ahead and verify our default code in the tabular list. And I-10, in fact, I-10 is our boss too. See that? And this boss doesn't have any red box next to it, so it means that we can code it. All right? And finally, our final step, review all guidelines. We do have guidelines. We have guidelines at the boss level, really above the boss level. We have excludes 1 notes, excludes 2 notes. These are guidelines. Just trust me for now. They are not applicable. We'll discuss them later. But we have excludes 1 notes, excludes 2 notes underneath the code. We should read it. And then finally, we have our AHA coding clinic guidelines. This applies to real world coding. So you know what, coders? If you said that I-10 is your final answer, outstanding. What if our task was to look up essential hypertension? Our task, we have to look up the main term. So we have to determine of those two terms, which one is the main term. Well, we can guess that the main term is hypertension, but now I'm going to show you the AMCI way of how we teach our students to identify the main term. Are you ready? All right. All right. So I love this because it's almost, it's great. Anywhere. I don't think they teach this anywhere. People just kind of guess. People don't typically have a way of doing it, a standard or a format. We do. So let's get started. How do you select main terms, the main term of a diagnosis? There are 3 ways. One of the 3 ways, and in the following order. So there's a hierarchy. The highest of them all are eponyms. An eponym is a disease or illness named after someone or something, such as Graves' disease, right? Or Addison's disease, Legionnaire's disease, right? It's named after something. This is number 1 because once you look up this eponym, it should take you straight to the code. There are no second or third steps. Why? Does it matter if you have to see 2 or 3 steps? Well, we are teaching a lot of people to take their medical coding exams, and people who work in the industry do have time constraints. The fewer page turns, the more time you save. So let's just do it from the gate. Let's learn the most quick and efficient way to do it. All right, so if it's not an eponym, the second way to identify the main term is a diagnosis. So if there is a diagnosis in the term, that diagnosis is your main term. And finally, if you don't know what to do or you can't tell what is the main term, select the word part that is doing something. For instance, you have a foot. You have foot disorder. So you got foot and disorder. Of the two coders, which term is doing something? Well, if you said disorder, outstanding, because it's here, that's correct. But think about it. A foot is not doing anything. It's a noun. It's just sitting there, right? A body part typically can't do anything. It's just there. However, this is not the only way to look up terms. You could very possibly find your code by selecting foot, then disorder. But AMCI came up with this method so that you can have a standard, so you can develop a way to do it, so that you're not jumping all around trying to figure out what to do. So if you have a method, then you are, it kind of eliminates unnecessary stuff. So we advise you to use this method, use it all the time, regardless, and you can't go wrong. All right, I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to kind of show you how to select main terms. You ready? All right, let's get started. All right, so we've got heart failure. Heart failure. Is it an eponym? Well, no, that's not an eponym. Is there a diagnosis there? No, I don't see a diagnosis. I see heart and I see failure. So, the word part that's doing something of heart and failure, which word part is doing something? If you said failure, outstanding, remember that body part is a noun. It's not doing anything, but that failure, yeah, it's doing something. It's failing, right? So the word part that's doing something described our main term. Our main term is failure. All right, so I walked you through that here. Oh, we went a little too fast. Okay. All right, so the next slide will do it. Abdominal aortic aneurysm. The main term is aneurysm, and the reason, go ahead, tell me. Yeah, I can hear you. Tell me, why is aneurysm, of the 3 terms, why is aneurysm the main term? If you said, because it's a diagnosis. Outstanding, it is. Now, how do you know if it's a diagnosis or not? Well, if it can stand alone, you've heard of people having an aneurysm. Yeah, there you go. Abdominal aortic is a more specific aneurysm, but aneurysm is a diagnosis that can stand alone. Now, hopefully we don't have any slip-ups, and I want you to tell me, what is the main term? All right, bacterial pneumonia. Of the 2 words, which one is your main term? If you said pneumonia, outstanding. Yes. Why? because pneumonia is a diagnosis. It's a diagnosis. Yeah, it can stand alone. People have pneumonia all the time. Next, eye infection. I don't like this. I don't like this. All right, so maybe we will tell you the main term, but we'll you can say why that's the main term. Yeah, that's Mrs. J going with the flow. All right, so eye infection. Of the two, infection is the main term, but why is infection the main term? If you said because it's a diagnosis, outstanding. Yes, infection can stand alone. Bone disorder. Of the two, which term is your main term? If you said disorder, outstanding. Now, why is disorder your main term? If you said because disorder is the word part that's doing something outstanding, yes, disorder is not a diagnosis. It can't be because what disorder of what? Something's missing. But disorder is definitely doing something. It's being disorderly. And your bone, well, that's your body part. It can't do anything. Next. I don't know what's wrong, my OnClicks. I really wanted you to know that Parkinson's disease is Parkinson's is your main term. Why is Parkinson's your main term? If you said it's an eponym, outstanding. It's an eponym. And you might say, Mrs. J, how am I to know that Parkinson's is an eponym? Well, often that apostrophe S is your giveaway. All right, I have some more. Stricture of the bladder neck. Of those 4 or 5 terms, which is your main term or condition? If you said stricture, outstanding, yes. Why? Why is stricture your main term? Well, there are 2 reasons. It's a diagnosis, and some of you may not know that's a diagnosis, but it is the word part that's doing something. It's constricting. Yeah, it's getting smaller. All right, so we know this next one doesn't work. This is drug overdose due to barbiturates. Man, I think it is going to work. All right, what is your main term? Let me give you a second. All right, if you said overdose, outstanding. Yes, overdose is a diagnosis, right? It can stand alone. You're doing great, coders. Okay, what's the main term? Ectopic or pregnancy? Ectopic or pregnancy? If you said pregnancy, outstanding, because pregnancy is a diagnosis, right? That is a condition. Yeah. All right. Oh, hemolytic anemia. Hemolytic anemia. Of the 2, anemia is your main term. It's your main term because anemia is a diagnosis, right? Yeah, you've heard of people being diagnosed with anemia, but hemolytic anemia is a more specific type of anemia. All right, we've got 2 more. Arterial stenosis, arterial stenosis. Of the 2, which is your main term? If you said stenosis, Outstanding. Stenosis is your main term because stenosis is actually a diagnosis. But if you didn't know, you could have chosen the word part that is doing something. Your arterial, your artery, that is your body part. Okay? And finally, Ludwig's angina. And your main term, of course, is Ludwig's. You tell me why Ludwig's is your main term. It's your main term because it is an eponym. We know it's an eponym because it has an apostrophe S. And coders, if you got any of those right, outstanding. The purpose of this exercise was to show you which term is your main term, and this shall be the term that you look up in the alphabetic index. Now, it is not how can I say, this is the AMCI method. You can look up terms in other ways, you can, but if you have a standard way of doing it, that means you don't have to think about it. It is your method, and it will make you move faster. It will. All right, so let's review our main terms. All right, so in this order, this is the hierarchy. If it's an eponym, look up that eponym first. Next, the diagnosis. Next, if you don't know, select the word part that's doing something. All right, coders. So you've learned how to look up codes. You've learned how to identify the main term. Let's go ahead and put it all together. Let's practice identifying the main term, then looking up the code. Are you ready? All right. Inguinal hernia. Coders, what is the main term? If you said hernia, outstanding. Hernia is your main term because it is a diagnosis. Remember, coders, a hernia can stand alone. You've heard of someone having a hernia. Have you ever heard of anyone having an inguinal? No. All right, and also inguinal is your body area. That's where the hernia is. And if it's not the main term, it is the subterm. Yes, so if nothing else, that is the main point for this little demonstration that we're doing right now. All right, so our main term is hernia. Let's go ahead and look it up in the alphabetic index. Hernia. Now it's time to look up our subterm. Yes, you look up subterms. And after your hernia, after you've located, you scroll down until you find your subterm. And that's why we have these little gray guiders. And boom, here it is, inguinal. So hernia is your main term, inguinal is your subterm, and look at your code. K40.90, and I want to point out that K40.90, well, I'm going to ask you, is this, I'm going to put my little pointer there, is this our default code? Yes or no? If you said no, outstanding. It's not a default code because remember, your code, your default code is the code that's next to your main term, and inguinal is not our main term. Just an FYI. All right, let's continue. This inguinal hernia K40.90, that is our subcategory code, and now we're ready to look it up in the tabular list. So we're going to verify in the tabular list. K40.9, that's where we begin. Let's start here because this is where I like to start at, we're given K40.90. But let's start at the beginning of that subcategory just so you know that you're in the right subcategory. And also, um, you have to read at the subcategory level to get the whole story. So if K40.90 is unilateral inguinal hernia without obstruction or gangrene, how do we know that's correct? It is correct because you could either have unilateral, which is one side, or bilateral, which is both sides. If it's not documented, it is going to be the lesser. So unilateral is one side. They're not specifying the side, but it's one side. It's definitely not bilateral. And also, we can assume that this is without obstruction or gangrene because it's not documented. These are teachable moments, so just remember that. If it's not documented, then of course you can assume that it's without obstruction or gangrene. Now let's go down to our subcategory code that we're looking up, K40.90. This is unilateral inguinal hernia without obstruction or gangrene, not otherwise specified as recurrent, meaning that we don't know if this hernia is recurring or not, so that is correct. But if you look underneath at these supplemental terms, inguinal hernia not otherwise specified, indeed, this is correct. So we do have a boss. Make sure that you check at your boss level. And if we would have checked at the boss, we would have known right away, inguinal hernia, not otherwise specified. We're in the right location. We're in the right category. All right, so we know K40.9 is our code. All right, so now I want to switch gears a little bit, coders, and I want to talk about seventh character codes. We really never did code a 7-character code, so let's talk about it. All right, coders, I think it's best if I just demonstrate how to code a 7th-character code. Well, we have a situation. This patient is being seen in the ED for an injury sustained to the right kidney. All right, so I'm going to take you right to the tabular list just so you can look at how the code is laid out. All right, so we know that we're going to have to code a 7-character code. How do you know? Well, if you start at the boss, this is S37, you're going to code the injury of urinary and pelvic organs. Then you're going to go down to injury of the kidney. Then we have to code for the right kidney. So it's going to take us all the way down here, S37.001. Now, if you look inside the box, it says you need to code, this code needs to be 7-character long. So if it needs to be 7 characters long, if we look down, there are no further codes. So what that means is that we need a 7-character extender. Yes, so extenders are these modifiers, and they're right up here in this extender box, which will tell us, which will give us more information or allow us to code more information about this injury. All right, so in this extender box, we can choose either A, D, or S. All right, so whatever is specific to our injury, we'll code it. Whatever is appropriate, we code it. This patient was seen in the ED. That means it's happening right now. With that said, If we look at A, A is for initial encounter. That means this is the first time the patient has been seen for it. D, subsequent encounter. That means after the initial. And S, sequela. Sequela is not coding for any acute injury. However, the diagnosis that was caused by that acute injury. So it's the sequel. And I don't want to instruct on sequela right now because I'm going to do it in our next discussion. But for now, just know the sequela is caused after the initial or the acute injury, or caused by it, or related to it. All right. So if this patient was seen in the ED, which of the three will be our seventh character extender, the seventh character that we're going to place at the end of this 6-character code? If you said A, outstanding, because A is for initial, and almost always when a patient's seen in the ED, it's acute care happening right now. So if we append the correct 7th character extender, A, S37.001A, that's our answer. And look, coders, it's 7 characters long. Now, another thing that I want to tell you about these extender boxes. Extended boxes are located above the related subcategory. It's got to be in the same path. When I say path, it's got to be, it can't be S37.1 because S37.1 will not be applicable. In other words, these extender boxes have to be directly above the subcategory code. If it's not, then you choose the extender box that is at the boss level. So it's got to be above it, above the code, not beneath the code, but above the code and directly related to the subcategory. All right. So if nothing else, just never ever go below, go above. And it's got to be on the same path. Can't have numbers outside of the path. All right. So now that we know how to select a 7th character extender, I got one more thing to tell you about. Well, 7 characters have a dual role. Yes, these extender boxes are used for 2 purposes. Number 1, to assign the 7th character extender for 6 character codes. And 2, it serves as a placeholder for 7 character codes. Yes, when you see these blue boxes right here, these are 7 character boxes. But if you look next to the right of the box, they are not 6 characters long. So what do? How do you make this 6 characters long? Because we are told that this must be a 7-character code. Well, this is what you do. You use the X and X as a placeholder. Then you go up and assign your 7th character extender. All right, so when your blue box says, hey, this is required, this must be 7 characters long, and the codes are too short, then you'll have to use an X as a placeholder to elongate it or lengthen the code. So let's say that this patient was in the ED due to a contusion of pelvic organs. All right, so let's say that's our scenario. And let's say the code is S37.92. Contusion of pelvic organs, right? S37.92. This is 5 characters long. Our instructions are that this code must be 7 characters. So what we'll do is we will put an X after the 5th character. That X will be 6 characters long. Then we'll go up to our 7th character extender box, grab the appropriate 7th character extender, and in our case, it's an A because we're in the ED, and boom, here is our code. And that X marks the spot. And also too, remember, see the X in the box? There you go. That's your reminder that you need to elongate it or use X as a placeholder. All right, so I'm finished talking about the structure of the code. And coders, if you feel that you need to revisit this, go ahead and press rewind, listen to it again. Coders, we are at the end of our discussion. I know I gave you a lot. Feel free to rewind, listen again and again if you need to. But the key things that I want you to take away from this instruction. Number 1, what a category code is, what a boss is, what a subcategory code is, and what a code is. And finally, those red boxes, what to do when you see a red box. Remember, do not code it. Never code a code that has a red box next to it. Go one more. And if that code has a red box next to it, go one more. And if it's a 6 character code and it requires 7 characters, get your 7 character extender. Now, I think coders, it is time for us, let's code some more, let's practice some more. Traditionally, I let you do a silent code, but no, I want to code with you. Are you ready? You ready to practice some more? I think you are. Let's go. All right, coders, here are our instructions. You have to identify first your main term, then your subterm. You'll look up your main term, then you'll scroll down for the subterm. Then you'll take the code that you get, look it up in the tabular list, verify it, then code it. All right, I understand, coders, that you may need more time than we will be allotting for this exercise. So go ahead, pause the presentation, solve at your own pace, then press play and pick back up where you left off. All right, so I will put a pink bar across the screen. At the end of that pink, when the pink bar ends, that means time is up. All right, ready? Let's begin. Okay, coders, time is up. What is your main term? If you said Bunyan, outstanding. All right, what is your subterm? if you said foot. Very good. All right, now step 1. Look up our main term. We're going to go to the alpha index, look up bunion, and it takes us to M21.61. You see a checkbox. There's a check with inside of a box. That means that you're going to need more code, more characters. Now, as you can see, underneath bunion, there's nothing else. No, you don't have to look up your subterm. That's because a foot, bunions are only on your feet. So you don't have to look it up. That's why I assume you don't have to, but you don't. But now we can go and verify what we have. M21.61 in the tabular list. All right, so let's stop at the subcategory level. M21.6, we know we can stop here because it's on the path. M21.6. And this is other acquired deformities of the foot. Let's go down to 6.1, bunion. Here we go. And you see to the left of the code, you see a red box. So that means that we have to go one more. We can't code that code, but we're in the right place. So if we look below, you'll see M21.611, M21.612, and 619. 11 is for the right foot, 12 is for the left, and 19, that's for unspecified foot. Well, if we look at our documentation, it tells us that this is the right foot. Yeah, so we're going to code for the right foot. And our code is M21.611, bunion of the right foot. All right, coders, how did you do? Did you get that correct? If you did, outstanding. But you know what, coders? If you learned something, that's priceless. Now, I have a feeling that many of you got that one. Now, we have a little more of a challenge. Are you up for that challenge, coders? I know you can do it. Here it is, hypertrophy of tonsils and adenoids. All right, coders. Time's up. All right, my question to you, what is the main term? If you said hypertrophy or hypertrophy, you are correct. Now, what are the subterms? Okay, I think I gave it away. If you said tonsils and adenoids, outstanding. All right, so let's do the first step. Step 1, look up the main term. All right, so we found hypertrophy in the alpha index. Next, we are going to scroll down to our subterms, and we're going to stop right at tonsils. But we're not going to code that because we have tonsils and adenoids, right? So if we look just a little bit lower, you'll see adenoids, tonsils with adenoids. You know what? That is perfect. So you see the beauty of just continuing. Just don't settle for the first thing that you come with. If you learn to just read a little further, go a little further, and you will really get the hang of coding to the highest level of specificity. Okay, we're going to talk about that later, coders, but just keep that in the back of your head. All right, so we saw tonsils with adenoids, and it gave us subcategory code J35.3. The next step, look up your subcategory code in the tabular list. And you know what? I'm going to stop at the boss, J35. J35, this category is for chronic diseases of tonsils and adenoids. I stopped here because you always, there's a strong possibility that you could have some guidelines and instructions. And in this case, we do. It tells us to code additional for any smoking related disorders. Now, our documentation doesn't mention it, so it doesn't apply. So we're going to let it fly. Now, the next thing that we need to do is let's stay on the path. We're directed to J35.3. We're going to bypass 0, 1, and 2, and we're going to go right to 3. This is hypertrophy of tonsils with hypertrophy of adenoids. All right, that is our code. We verified it, and the correct code is J35.3. Okay, coders, how did you do? Did you knock that one out? I know you did. I know some of you did. But you know what? Those that learned something, you know what? Pat yourself on the back. That is priceless. All right, so we've got another exercise. Let's get started. Fibrocystic disease of breast. All right. Time's up. How are you, coders? Okay, I got a question for you. What is the main term? If you said disease, outstanding. Now, some people might say, well, wait a minute. Fibrocystic could be the main term. Yeah, it could be, but let's really process this. A main term is determined by whether or not it's an eponym first, followed by a diagnosis, followed by the word that's doing something. And you might say, okay, fibrocystic may be a diagnosis. If it is, it's missing something. It is possibly doing something, but don't you think disease is doing the most? Yeah, I think disease is doing the most, so it's kind of safe, but it's not wrong to check fibrocystic. But disease is definitely a word that's doing something, and we know that, so we're going to call that our main term. Any other term will be our subterm, so I'm going to name fibrocystic as a subterm, and so too will be breast. All right. Let's go ahead and move to the first step, and that's looking up our main term in the alphabetic index. We're going to look up disease. Disease of breast. Now let's read this language, and the key to selecting the correct code is reading, especially in ICD-10-CM. That's the key. So let's read. It says breast. See also disorder of the breast. Cystic, chronic. See mastopathy. Cystic, fibrocystic. See mastopathy, cystic. All right. So it's telling us to see mastopathy for cystic or fibrocystic. So that's what we have. Our subterm is fibrocystic. So let's go ahead and see mastopathy. We're going to look up mastopathy in the alphabetic index under M, and we are here. It says mastopathy, mastopathia, N64.9. However, let's read some more. Chronic, cystica, C, mastopathy, cystic, cystic. N60.1. This is the code it's directing us to because cystic and fibrocystic are synonymous. Mastopathy, cystic. That's what our instructions told us to do. N60.1 is our code that we're going to look up in the tabular list. And also you see the black box with the check. It's saying that we're going to have more characters. So let's go ahead. We're going to verify in the tabular list. We're going to stop at the boss because we just need to do that. While we're learning, stop at the boss when you can. N60, this is the code for benign mammary dysplasia. All right, so we don't really know what that means. And we also know that we can't code it because you see that red box. Let's stay on the path and let's go further. The next character on the path will be 1. So 60.1. This is diffuse cystic mastopathy. All right. So again, this is a 5-character code. This is only 4 characters, so we're going to have to go one more. But it is awesome that we stopped here, because if you look underneath, you see this supplemental terms. You see cystic breast and fibrocystic disease of breast. So this says, hey, I am in the correct area, even though the alphabetic index said code this, but I know it's correct. Our diagnosis is fibrocystic disease of breast, same exact terms. So we're in the right area, but we don't have enough characters. So if we go below, the characters will, the 5th characters designations will tell you the laterality. Are we going to code for the right breast? Are we coding for the left breast? Or are we coding for unspecified breast? Well, if you look at our documentation, there's no mention of left or right breast. So we will code for the unspecified breast. So N60.19. That is our answer. And if you said N60.19, outstanding. Or coders, if you learned something, that is priceless. All right, we have another diagnosis. Bronchiectasis with acute bronchitis. Time's up, coders. What is the main term? If you said bronchitis and bronchiectasis, you would be correct. And our subterm is acute. But coders, either one of these terms can be the main term, but we're going to have to select one. I'm going to select bronchitis. If you selected bronchiectasis, you'll still get the correct answer. All right, let's look up our main term in the alphabetic index. So, just to point out, if you can only have one main term, the other terms will be subterms, just to let you know that. Now I'm going to look up bronchitis first. That's my main term. I'm not going to select the code that's there because I need to go further, right? So bronchitis to acute, right? Then underneath acute with bronchiectasis. And where you end up, that will be your code. All right? So just want to point out that you don't code the codes, don't assign the codes that you assign the code at the end of your lookup. All right, so assign the code at the end of the lookup. Where you end up, that's the code that you assign. Now we end at J47.0. The next step, let's go ahead and verify our code in the index, in the tabular list. And I'm stopping at the boss, J47. I observe that it does have a red box, so we can't code it, but there are some guidelines, some red instructional notes, and these pertain to smoking disorders, and we have no mention of any smoke in our documentation, so it doesn't apply. We're letting it fly. I also um, I also am just making note of some notes. Includes notes, excludes notes. I'm also looking at this definition. My publication, I believe this publication is AMA. They have definitions that I want to read because I may not know what bronchiectasis is. So the definition of bronchiectasis is dilation of the bronchi with mucus production and persistent cough due to infection or chronic conditions that causes diminished lung capacity and frequent infections of the lung. So if you wanted to know what bronchiectasis is, here is the definition. Now I'm going further. J47.0, bronchiectasis with acute lower respiratory infection, that's your bronchitis, and bronchiectasis with acute bronchitis is our supplemental term, so we know this is correct. And underneath it, we have an instructional note. It tells us to use additional code to identify the infection. Now, if the patient had maybe some kind of influenza virus like influenza A, adenovirus, or even some type of bacteria, you could code that as well. All right. So I like J47.0, and that's our answer. So if you said J47.0, outstanding. But if you learned something, that is priceless. All right, coders, I'm ready to keep going. Are you? Let's do it. Our next term, influenza with gastroenteritis. Go ahead, determine the main term, look up your main term, and solve. You have a minute. Time's up, coders. How did you do? All right, what is your main term? All right, this might be a little tricky. Influenza. I selected influenza as my main term, but gastroenteritis is also a main term. But I'm going to go with influenza being my main term. It is a diagnosis, so is gastroenteritis. And this is the way the doctor documented it, so I'm going to look it up this way. But you can look it up either way. All right, you could have looked up gastroenteritis with influenza or influenza with gastroenteritis, but I have a sneaky suspicion that you probably would not find it if you looked it up gastroenteritis with influenza. I could be wrong, but they're both main terms. I'm going with influenza. So I'm going to look up influenza in my alphabetic index first. Influenza. And I'm still going because I got to look for and find my subterm, which is gastroenteritis. So influenza with gastroenteritis takes us to code J11.2. I'm going to go verify my J11.2 in the tabular list. I'm stopping at the boss because I just need to stop. I'm new at this, right? So J11, this is influenza due to unidentified influenza virus. Okay, I don't know better, but that's what the boss is saying. I can't code it. It says there are 4 characters, and it's not specific enough for me. So if I go down, I stay on the path J11, and I go to point 2, this is the code for influenza due to unidentified influenza virus with gastrointestinal manifestations. In other words, influenza, gastroenteritis, not otherwise specified. That is indeed what we have. Influenza, gastroenteritis, and nothing else was specified about it. So if you said 11.2 is your answer, you are correct. Outstanding. But if you learned something, coders, that's priceless. All right, I'm not ready to go now. We have a few more. So if you want to continue, I do too. If you want to take a break, go ahead and press pause. Take a break. All right, let's go. Our diagnosis, acute bleeding peptic ulcer. All right, your time starts now. I think I gave you a few more seconds. Time is up. All right, what is the main term? Acute bleeding peptic ulcer. If you said ulcer, outstanding. It's your diagnosis. And acute bleeding and peptic, they all describe the type of ulcer. In fact, acute describes the severity. Bleeding is the type, and peptic, well, I think peptic is the type, and bleeding is a more specific indicator. All right, let's look up our main term in the alphabetic index. Ulcer, what type? Peptic. With acute, yes. Severity. Acute what? Hemorrhage. K27.0. You might say, wait a minute, Mrs. J, how do you know to code bleeding as hemorrhage? Well, I'm going to show you, and this is going to be something you're going to need to remember. All right? All right, so we're going to go to K27.0. Look it up in the tabular list. Let's start at the boss, K27. It's got a red box. We know we're not coding it, but we're going to read it. This is the category for peptic ulcer. The site is unspecified. That is correct. There's no specification of where the peptic ulcer is. This includes a gastroduodenal ulcer or a peptic ulcer. Now you have to use an additional code to identify alcohol and dependence. We don't have any mention of any alcohol or alcohol dependence, so we're going to let it fly. But we've got an excludes one note. It says, hey, if you're coding for peptic ulcer of a newborn, you don't code it unless you've got, a newborn with a peptic ulcer and a newborn with peptic. Oh, excuse me. You just don't code. You don't use this. I'm sorry. I'm getting confused. In fact, I'm moving ahead. Let me stop. Let me back up. All right. So, but what I do want to draw your attention to is this coding tip. This is how I knew that I could code bleeding as hemorrhage. Assign a code with hemorrhage when a peptic and GI bleeding are documented. We do have bleeding documented. The ICD-10-CM classification assumes that the two are related without the provider linking the two conditions. Evidence of bleeding during a procedure is not required. And then there's another tip for bleeding ulcers resulting from anticoagulant therapy, and that's not our situation. But this tip tells us that when you have bleeding, you code it to hemorrhaging. All right, so now that's why it's important to stop at the boss. See that valuable information that we got? Yes. All right, so our code is K27.0. K27.0, we need to verify that acute peptic ulcer, site unspecified with hemorrhage. I think that's our code. And if you said K27.0, outstanding. How you coming along, coders? You doing okay? Okay, hopefully you learned something. We got another scenario. I think we have two more. Let's get going. Dementia with aggressive behavior. Time starts now. Time's up. All right, coders, this could be a little difficult for some people too. All right, which of the two terms is your main term? Dementia or aggressive behavior? I chose dementia. And aggressive behavior could also be a main term, but dementia is a diagnosis, so is aggressive behavior. Choose one, look it up, but I chose dementia. This is what I suggest that you do. Follow the documentation. If you have two terms that could potentially be the diagnosis, go in the order presented. Yeah, let's follow the doctor's documentation. You can't go wrong, all right? All right, so, and if it doesn't work, then look up the other term. All right, that will be our method. Now, let's look up our main term in the alphabetic index. Aggressive behavior will be our subterms. Dementia with aggressive behavior. It takes us to code F03.91. Let's go ahead and verify in the tabular list. F03.91, unspecified dementia with behavioral disturbance. It says aggressive behavior, so let's look under at our supplemental terms. We have unspecified dementia with aggressive behavior. This is indeed our code. Now, this is unspecified dementia because the doctor didn't specify the type of dementia. So this is indeed our answer. Coders, if you said F03.91, outstanding. Now, coders, if you didn't get it right, but you learned something, you know what? That's even better because it's priceless. All right, so we have one more to look up. That's it, one more, then you can take the ultimate break before part 2. Acute cystitis due to E. coli infection. Your time starts now. Time is up, and coders, I know you did not have enough time. I know you didn't, but hopefully you paused the presentation, solved it on your own, and let me show you what I did. What is the main term? Well, the main term, cystitis. Yes, that's a diagnosis. And you know we have another main term, infection. Infection. All right. We have a subterm with cystitis, acute cystitis, and E. coli is also our subterm. And the reason why I know that we have two main terms is because I tried to look this up and I got turned around. So I'm going to show you how I knew. All right, so I looked up cystitis first. Cystitis. Then I looked up acute and it took me to N30.00. Well, underneath I saw no mention of E. coli infection. So I knew that I had to also look up E. coli infection. So And also, after I went and verified my N30.00, I went to the boss N30. It said this is cystitis, but this is what really told me I had to code also E. coli. It tells you use an additional code to identify the infectious agent. Well, if you didn't know, you know now. E. coli is an infectious agent. All right, so let me continue my assignment. So I'm going down. I need to code for cystitis, N30.0 acute cystitis. Then it takes me down to N30.00 acute cystitis without hematuria. So hematuria is blood in the urine, and there's no mention of hematuria. So it will always be coded to without. If it's not mentioned, then it doesn't exist. All right, so now if we go back to our instructional note, it says use an additional code to identify the infectious agent. Not only is it telling us to code additionally, it's telling us how to sequence it. This is new. All right, so it's telling us to code it after cystitis. When you see the language code additionally, that means coded after cystitis. Now, let's go ahead and look up E. coli infection. Our main term will be infection. We're going to look it up in the alphabetic index. Infection due to E. coli. E. coli is the shortened term for Escherichia. Ooh, Escherichia, Escherichia coli. Ooh. And if we go down, you'll see Escherichia coli is B96.20. We're going to look up in the tabular list B96.20, but we're going to stop at the boss. And this is the category for other bacterial agents as the cause of diseases classified elsewhere. We're going to go down to B96.2, Escherichia coli or E. coli as the cause of diseases classified elsewhere. We know we can't code it because it has a red box, so we're going one more. B96.20, there's no red box, we can code it. Unspecified Escherichia coli, E. coli as the cause of diseases classified elsewhere, Escherichia coli, NOS. This is indeed our code. Now, again, we are told how to sequence these codes. We're going to have to code first cystitis and code additionally the E. coli. And our code will look like this. N30.00 and B96.20 in that order. All right, coders, I know we had a teachable moment because we didn't discuss how to sequence, but hopefully you learned something, and we will discuss it in the future chapters. All right, coders, how do you feel? Well, I want to congratulate you because you've done so much in this session. You learned the history of ICD-10-CM, the structure of an ICD-10-CM code. You learned how to look up ICD-10-CM codes, how to determine the main term and subterms, and you learned how to select a seventh character extender. You learned a lot, so if you need to, go ahead, take a break. And coders, I'll see you in part 2. That's when we're going to talk about a lot of the guidelines. We're going to talk about conventions and general coding guidelines. So I'll see you then. Excellent job, coders. Outstanding. This was an AMCI exclusive presentation. Until next time.